Reality TV shows have proven to be real moneymakers for the networks. They capitalize on Americans' innate voyeuristic tendencies by producing programs that appeal to the same swath of society that slows down to stare at automobile accidents. From Survivor-type contests to the Bachelor and Bachelorette dating shows to the current spate of offerings about the junk people put into storage units and the life-threatening junk that people pile up in their houses. In some ways, I think this sort of programming is like taking the moral pulse of the nation. There's a form of philosophical argument called reductio ad absurdum, or reduced to the point of absurdity. What we see in a lot of reality TV is a reflection of our society in a mirror. And in most ways, it's a funhouse mirror that exaggerates our worst features. But what we see in these reality shows is the character of our civilization, our society, pushed to an absolute extreme. Over the past 2 generations, most manufactured goods that we consume and buy have become relatively cheaper. A house that was built 50 years ago had a fairly small closet, and most people managed to fit their clothing, their shoes, their lives into a fairly small closet pretty easily. But as things like shoes and clothing began to come in from Asia, from the Philippines, from virtual child and slave labor manufacturing, they became more affordable. And as they became more affordable, we thought we had to have more of them. Walk-in closets were a rare luxury 40 years ago, but now even the smallest of apartments have them because we just have so much stuff that our living space gets smaller and our storage space gets larger. Now, hoarding is an illness. It's not a form of TV entertainment. I'm sorry that they have turned it into a TV show because it is a serious problem. It's an illness that has several possible mental health issues involved. Most people tend to talk about it as an obsessive compulsive disorder, and that's part of it, but that's not all of it. In most cases, there's also some pretty severe paranoia and possibly schizophrenia involved in someone that lives that way. As a pastor from the old days, when a big part of our job was going around to visit members in their homes, I can tell you that I've seen a lot of hoarding. Oftentimes, the people who live in the homes of hoarders will emerge properly dressed, smell good, seem normal, but they live in filth. They live in an existence surrounded by cans of out-of-date food, stacks of old newspapers and magazines, bags of clothes, sometimes even used tires and empty bottles and plastic boxes. I suppose people may watch some of those shows so that they can assure themselves that at least I'm not that bad. You know, my house may not be what it ought to be, but at least it's not as bad as that. But the mere presence of so many hoarders in the midst of our consumer society is really a reductio ad absurdum argument that reveals the sickness of our entire consumer society. Hoarders are the extreme version of almost all of us who collect, store, save, and attach ourselves to so many things. I use the Four Noble Truths of Buddhism as our wisdom text today because I believe that progressive Christianity and Buddhism have a great deal in common, and as such, we really can learn a lot from each other if we are willing to pay attention to each other's insights. The first of the Four Noble Truths is translated in very many different ways, but it essentially says that life is suffering. Life is full of suffering, life is defined by suffering, but the first noble truth, the first fundamental realization is that life itself is suffering. The second flatly says that the source of all of our suffering is our attachment to things, our desire for things. And that can be attachment to people or to power or maybe even to life itself. The third noble truth tells us that the way out of suffering is to become detached. And that can even mean giving up expectations. You know, the sense that we have a great truth that is owed to us by the world, that kind of Norman Rockwell sense that everybody ought to be happily married in a big happy family and have lots of kids gathered around the Thanksgiving table. The way out of suffering is to give up the expectation that you should own something, have something, realize something, and to accept the reality of your life. Clearly, detachment is exactly the opposite of what our consumer society is built upon. Commercials, advertisements are literally scientifically designed to make us want to buy something, to own something, to use something, and ultimately to store more and more stuff. I'm really trying to have a healthy diet and to exercise. I'm really trying to get a firm grip on my own health. But you watch TV at night and they will advertise one of those sloppy, nasty hamburgers and fries in a way where you thought you were going to bed and you find yourself hopping around on one foot trying to get your pants back on. I've got to go have one of those. And you realize as soon as you hold it in your hand, I don't really want this. This is not really food. This is not something that I want. But there is a science to marketing that makes you think you've got to have it. Advertisements show us young, beautiful, sexy, happy people suggesting, either consciously or unconsciously, that the source of their youth, their beauty, their sex appeal, their joy, is the car they're driving, or the beer they're drinking, the clothes they're wearing, the vacation that they're taking. If you'll allow me to take this through a reductio ad absurdum, I want to apply this to a couple of other issues. This part of the country claims to be the meth capital of the world. Not a distinction that we really want to fight for, but we are at least one of the largest consumers of meth in America. If we're not number one, we're certainly ahead of whoever is in second place. What does meth do to a meth user? It intensifies pleasure for several hours, a rush of energy, of sexual potency, of strength and euphoria. But at the same time, it burns up the neuroreceptors in the brain that make pleasure possible. The high is so intense that it makes not being on the drug intolerable, which makes many first-time users immediately addicted. In the research we did a few years ago through Burrell, we discovered that there was, for most first-time users, less than 12 hours before they used a second time, that it is that powerfully addictive. But a long-time user of meth is never again able to enjoy normal living. The part of their brain that allows them to experience joy and happiness has been so damaged that only an artificial drug experience can stimulate them again. These people are not only no longer able to enjoy a song on the radio or a summer sunset or the smell of baking bread, they often stop caring about their own children or their own bodies. Using meth is like setting your house on fire because you're cold. It temporarily solves a small problem while creating a huge catastrophe. Meth addiction is extreme, but it is the tail end of a society that constantly seeks some kind of artificial pleasure while ignoring the simple pleasures of family, of nature, of friendship, art, music, the simple wonder of a star-filled sky. When was the last time that you went to an art museum to enjoy something beautiful that you could not buy? See, we go to the mall And if we like something, we buy it and we take it home. But our consumer society has trained us that we hardly have a category left in our brains for loving something that is beautiful simply because it is beautiful, but we can't take it home and hang it on the wall of our own living rooms. Our society consumes, but we're not especially good at simply enjoying. We're not good at simply appreciating something that has intrinsic value for what it is. I'm guilty of having my smartphone in my hands way too much. But isn't it obvious that there is no cell phone app that is anywhere near as fascinating as the flowers that you see at the Japanese stroll garden in our park on the west side of town, or the stars on a clear night? But Americans are spending now $16 million a year on Candy Crush, an app on iPhones to play to make little colored symbols go together and disappear. And so you realize there's hundreds of thousands of dollars a day being spent by people that just want to play that game for 5 more minutes. So if you'll allow me one more illustration. I'm not a prude and I'm not a Puritan, but I am concerned about the size and extent of the pornography industry. It trains its viewers to have absolutely unrealistic appetites for people with exaggerated sexual features, bodies, and abilities. It deadens a person's appreciation of the intrinsic value of the touch and appearance of an aging spouse who has supported you, raised children with you, kept a home with you. You don't have to nurture feelings of attraction for your spouse. You can take a pill, watch a video, and evidently end up sitting side by side in bathtubs out in the woods somewhere. And I've been single for so long, I don't even understand what that last part is about. I have no idea what that's for. And I'll have to ask our internet audience now, if you would please just sit up and start listening again, because I'm going to go out on a limb here and suggest that there is a close similarity between pornography and fundamentalist and evangelical religion. Fundamentalists and traditionalists demand that mortal life is only a beginning, just a drop in the bucket. They refuse to accept that their time of existence is limited. And so like a hoarder, like an addict, like a porn addict, they want to hold on to their existence for all of time because real life is not enough. The 364 sunsets that they are given every year, the sunsets that they almost always ignore, should in their minds be endless for them. Now, other religions find the Christian view of life after death to be rather offensive and insulting. I think it is like a porn addiction in which reality is always inadequate. You have my permission to disagree with me, even though this thought is going to revisit your awareness every time you hear someone who speaks confidently about life after death. That's just the way the brain works. Once your mind has been stretched to apprehend a new idea, it never goes back to its original shape. But let me get back to this Buddhist path. The tradition about the life of the Buddha was that he was born to great wealth, but when he became aware of the suffering of the poor, he could no longer live in his father's palace. He could no longer live surrounded by comfort of the aristocracy. So he went the other extreme. He became an ascetic monk, living at the point of starvation and dehydration for years. Eventually, he realized that both opulent wealth and extreme poverty are denial of reality. They are deceptions. He taught that the body is a vessel that requires nourishment, rest, and care, and sometimes relaxation or entertainment. And so he encouraged his followers to find a middle path, a life of moderation in all things, but no extremes of either indulgence or self-denial. There is absurdity at both ends of that spectrum, both for us as individuals and for us as a civilization. Buddhism, unlike Christianity, is not wedded to a set of creedal claims that followers are supposed to simply believe this list of teachings. Buddhism finds deep spirituality in a passionate devotion to the truth. Now, I rendered the fourth step as following a spiritual path, or the fourth of the Noble Truths. It literally says following the eightfold path. Now, I'm sorry about all the numbers in this sermon, the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path, and I've got another one still coming. But the Eightfold Path, none of the aspects of that journey should be foreign to the ears of progressive Christians. It is about living a spiritual life, a life of discipline, moderation, and devotion to leading what turns out to be a good life. The path guides you to right perspective, right thought, right speech, right action, right livelihood, sincere effort, mindfulness, and awareness. That's the 8 aspects of the path. And I think I probably need to devote a sermon to that maybe later this summer after our conference. I suppose that most religions have sort of a central mantra that practitioners can return to in times of worry. When the plane is going down, the Muslim says one thing, a Christian says something else, and a Jew says something else. Jews and Christians both might recite the 23rd Psalm, "The Lord is my shepherd, the Lord is my shepherd." And Christians often simply recite the Lord's Prayer, "Our Father who art in heaven." And we know Muslims of all stripes will simply say, "Allah Akbar," which means God is great, though I think more accurately rendered in those contexts, it is God is greater. Allah Akbar means God is greater than what frightens me. God is greater than the obstacles before me. But the mantra most often repeated in Buddhism, which I find to be the most attractive of all the world's religious traditions, and I won't try to say it all in the Burmese language, but there are a couple of words that I want you to know, to recognize when you hear them in other contexts. So once again, one more set of numbers. There are 4 Noble Truths, an eightfold path, and finally there are the 3 jewels, or the 3 treasures of Buddhism. The first is the Buddha who is the teacher. And the Buddha is not necessarily just one historical character. The Buddha is the person who is the teacher. The second in Burmese is called the Dharma, which is the teaching, the truth, the body of knowledge that is true. The third is called the Sangha, which is the community, the community of faith, the people that are attached to the truth. So when someone is becoming a Buddhist or being ordained as a monk, they repeat the mantra, "I take refuge in the Buddha, I take refuge in the Dharma, I take refuge in the Sangha." So again, the plane's going down, you're going to hear Allah Akbar, and you can hear "The Lord is my shepherd," and "Our Father who art in heaven." But if there's a Buddhist there, they'll be saying, "I take refuge in the Buddha, I take refuge in the Dharma, I take refuge in the Sangha. I find my peace, I find my security, I find my faith in the teacher, in dedication to what is true. I find my refuge, my certainty, my confidence, my courage by being a part of the community." Now, we live in a world that is seriously out of balance. The predominant religions of the world create terrorists, suicide bombers. Christians make misogynists and homophobes. And the worst may be that they create indifference about a real world of suffering by constantly obsessing about life and eternity. We live among consumers, hoarders, out-of-control capitalists, corporations that can influence elections, and the corporation can even have a religion, even if they don't appear to have a moral compass. For your sake, for the sake of the world, for the sake of the future, I encourage you to find a middle path, a path of mindful, disciplined living, and let us together take refuge in what is true and take refuge in our community.
Amen.
You have been watching a progressive Christian video from the Community Christian Church of Springfield, Missouri. We encourage our viewers to donate to our efforts in feeding the homeless and hungry of our community. Write to us at Reverend Dr. Ray at AOL.com for more information.